Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec. Today we are joined by Kevin Eikenberry from the US, and I will give you the abridged version of his introduction because he's pretty impressive when you read the full introduction. That will be on the website for those of you who would like more information about Kevin. Kevin Eikenberry is a world-renowned leadership and remote work thought leader, a multiple-time best-selling author, speaker, consultant, trainer, coach, leader, learner, husband and father, not necessarily in that order. Kevin is the Chief Potential Officer, which I love as a phrase, of the Kevin Eikenberry Group, a leadership and learning consulting company that has been helping organisations, teams and individuals reach their potential since 1993, and the co-founder of the Remote Leadership Institute, formed in 2014. Kevin's specialties include leadership, remote hybrid work and leadership, teams and teamwork, organisational culture, facilitating change, organisational learning, and more. Kevin's philosophy in business and in life is that every person and every organisation has extraordinary potential. Investments of time, energy, focus, and money are required for that potential to be realised. He believes learning is an active, ongoing process, not a passive one-time event. Learning, work, and life should be fun, and if we are doing it right, work and learning is play.
You got the long version there, but I'm not sure about all that.
I know, I'm coming to the good bits next. A more comprehensive bio will be on our website. He has a string of accolades, worked with organisations of all types and sizes and leaders from at least 43 countries around the world. Kevin has developed hundreds of learning events. He's a popular instructor on LinkedIn and a best-selling author, as I said earlier, as well as a sought-after keynote speaker. He also writes Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, a weekly email publication read worldwide since 2004, to assist organisations and individuals in turning their potential into desired results, as well as weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Remarkable Results. In addition, his leadership and learning blog is regularly recognised as one of the best leadership blogs in the world. His podcast, the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, has hosted hundreds of guests since July 2016 and boasts listeners in over 90 countries. And I will say for our listeners, we've already claimed dibs. We know that we've been going a year longer than Kevin. So he's thrown his hands in the air.
I'm bowing to you guys. We should have given you a different bio. You didn't have to read the one my mom wrote. We could have got you a better bio than that.
So now we go on to the family bit. So Kevin and his family.
No, please just
no. Kevin and his family live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Growing up on a Michigan farm, Kevin says he learned some of his most important leadership lessons working with his father. Kevin earned a degree, and I'm not going to say the initials because in this country, the initials that were in the bio mean something very different.
Well, they mean something else here too.
Okay.
If you change the context.
Okay. Well, he got his degree with honours, let's say, from Purdue University. Collects antique John Deere tractors, of which I have a couple on the farm here anyway. Is an avid reader and loves his family and his Boilermakers. And I'm assuming that the Boilermakers, because it's got a capital B, is either a football or a hockey team.
It's the sports teams from Purdue where I went to school.
Okay.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay.
So now we know.
And that is way more, everybody. So now, first episode of this show is over. We'll be back next week.
That's right. We'll ask him one question. For our listeners, this may well be someone who challenges Fulyana in the talking environment. Let's see how we go.
Well, I'm very shy. Don't worry.
Thank you for finding the time to join us, Kevin. We are indeed very interested to hear what you've got to say. We did send Kevin some questions, as we do with all of our guests. And the first one is about leaders or managers. What do we need going forward? And for those of you who are continuous listeners, you will know that we have had just finished a series where we talked about the difference between a manager and a leader. And so that was what triggered this question, because we thought, well, Kevin's going to be the next interesting person that can talk to us about, is there a difference, first of all, between leaders and managers? And what do we need for leaders, not for managers, going forward?
I haven't listened to the last episode, so I don't know where you guys landed, but I will tell you this, that I believe that people who, in the English language, whether it's wherever in the world that we use the English language, we tend to have these two words that we use almost like synonyms, manager and leader. And if you Google those two things, a lot of times you'll see stuff like management bad, leadership good. I don't think that's the answer. I think all of us that have that kind of role have both of those things to do. I believe in very short, we manage things and lead people. And that managing is a very important part of our role, but relatively an easier part of our role. There's much more likely clear distinctions about some ideas about how to do certain things, and it's a less complex part of our role, but both are super important. So there's my answer to that first half of the question. Don't know how it goes with what you guys already shared.
It's good, because we came to the conclusion that in the progression of a career, people become a manager, and over time they transform into this leader, but it's that transformation that is not focused on in terms of skilling them up into being a better leader.
Too often there isn't even enough in that first transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
From what we would call, from one of my books, from bud to boss, right? From being a peer to being a supervisor, leader, manager, whatever word you want to use there. And I'm not sure we do that largely as well as we could. But yeah, I agree with that. So what do we need now is the second part of your question.
Yeah.
I would say, well, I've just written a book called Flexible Leadership. So I suppose the right answer is, well, leaders need to be more flexible, right? But let's be clear about what I mean by that. What I mean by that is people might say, hey, flexible sounds good, but then they might say, but wait a minute, aren't I supposed to be stable, consistent? Aren't people supposed to know what they're getting from me? Like Kevin, how do you juxtapose?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that paradoxical? And I would say, well, in your mind's eye, think of a tree, not like a sapling, but a tree that's, 10, 15, 20, 30 or more years old. And you would say, well, that's stable and that's secure and it's not moving. It's rooted, right? Which makes it stable. Yeah. But that same tree, if there's any breeze at all, it's also flexible. It's pliant. It's movable. So it is both stable, consistent, and flexible. And I believe that's a metaphor for what we need to be as leaders. We need to be rooted in our values, in our principles, in the principles of human behavior, group dynamics, etc. We need to be rooted in the mission, purpose of our organization. And we need to be flexible in how we live. And that simple metaphor, I believe, says something really important that many people miss. And that is that too often we want to think about the world as, well, we're either this or we're that. That's an either or world. And I would propose, just like I already said about managing and leading, that it's a both and world, right? That we can be both consistent, stable, and flexible. That we can be both a manager and a leader. And that ultimately, for us to be more effective leaders in a world that's changing, that is uncertain, that it's hard to look much further ahead than the headlights on our vehicle at night, that we have to be ready to adapt and flex our approach as we understand the context in which we live. In fact, I would say to you that the antidote for uncertainty is flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Very early in your what we saw it through the bio, you identified leaders and leadership by hybrid and remote teams. What made you focus on that so early, well before the rest of the world decided that they needed to have that sort of flexibility, shall we say?
Yeah, we started doing work in that area around 2013, 2014 is when we started the Remote Leadership Institute. And then we wrote a book called The Long Distance Leader in 2017, long before. Or no, maybe it was 18. Maybe it was 18 now. But it was long before, a pandemic and lockdowns and all that stuff. And really, if you look at it then, we already had some people working at a distance at least some of the time. And we knew, because that's my team. My team has been hybrid, mostly really remote for almost our entire existence, certainly since I've had employees. And so we brought what we'd learned and what we'd shared with clients together around that, recognizing that not everything about leadership changes when you're doing it at a distance, but the things that change are really important. Like some of the roots didn't change, haven't changed, won't change. And yet the nuance, the difference, what is different matters a lot. And, I think the interesting thing about all that now is that everyone had sort of said, oh yeah, we had to do that. And Some organizations took that change really seriously in terms of supporting their leaders. Others didn't. If they didn't, especially if they didn't, now they've sort of said, well, we know how to do that. It doesn't mean we're doing it well. It just means we've now done it. I think there's still a lot of room for discussion about how do we lead a remote team, a hybrid team, distributed team. Around the world, we use different words for this, and everyone has a different version of it. And we have just for a long time just used the word long at a distance. And so I was walking through a client site today where they're hybrid for some of the folks. And I think I probably saw 30 desks and I saw 3 people at desks. Mm-hmm. Right. So even though the professed thing is we're going to be in the office some of the time, and it wasn't very many of them. Yeah. Right. And I think that's what the future is.
Absolutely.
But when you look back, it's exactly what you said. When we work in a global organization or national organization, we have been interacting at a distance anyway. But one consistent thing kept saying, keep in touch with those people. So, for example, visit them as well as that. So you have to have an element of interaction in person. Even limited, like you, of course, if it's in another country, you won't be visiting them every month.
Yeah. So let me share a story. So we were talking earlier about all of us having been podcasters for a long time. I had the great fortune having Tom Peters on my podcast twice. Wow. And the first time that Tom was on the show, and Tom is one of the 2 guys wrote, among other things, In Search of Excellence, from which the phrase came, managed by wandering around.
Yes.
And the first time he and I talked, it was prior to the pandemic. So put that in context. And his comment to me was, Kevin, if your team is remote, what does managing by wandering around look like? He said, is it managing by frequent flyer miles? And I said, no, Tom, it's leading by webcam. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't get on airplanes. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't get together, to your point. But really what I want to highlight is the one word you said that I think is super important, and that's interaction. Because what happens too often is that we end up only having transactions. We transact the business. So let's just play this out, right? I call my boss, Kim, picking up my phone as a prop. So I call Kim and I say, man, I know you're busy, Kim. I know you don't have, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I have a question. And so Kim says, what's your question? I ask her question. She answers the question. We say thank you. And we transacted the business. Yeah. There was no interaction. I'm not saying that should never happen, and I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen in the office, face-to-face, but it's less likely to happen. And so what I suggest is that when we're 2 things, even when we're not together physically, that we need to make sure we're interacting, talking about more than work and weather, if you will. If all we're talking about is the work and the weather, then we're just transacting business. Yeah. Sometimes that's okay. If that's all we're doing, going to cause problems. And when we're remote, it's more likely to happen. Not intentionally. It's just more likely to what's going to happen. So we have to try to overcome that. And then when we are together, however often that is, we have to make the interaction a major part of why we're together. So my team is only all together once a year. And so I would say half of the time we're together is not work. We have to rekindle, refresh, reconnect. All that has to be a part of it. And we have to plan that part as importantly as we plan the strategy and the problem solving.
Let's take a break from this introductory session with Kevin Eikenberry. Join us for part 2. For now, I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec.